The blizzard came without warning, the way death often does in Montana territory. One moment Rosemary Caldwell could see the rutted road ahead through the stagecoach window. Rose, as everyone had called her since childhood, preferred the shortened version. Rosemary felt too formal, too much like her mother's voice calling her to Sunday dinner. But out here, alone in the storm, with death creeping closer, even that small preference seemed meaningless. The next, the world dissolved into white fury. Wind screamed across the open prairie like something alive and hungry, rattling the coach so violently she had to grip the wooden seat to keep from being thrown to the floor. She was the only passenger. That should have been her first warning. The driver had given her a long measuring look when she'd boarded in Helena that morning, a look that said he knew something she didn't. But Rose had paid her fare, $3.50, that she could barely afford, and the man had pocketed the money without comment. Now, 6 hours into what should have been an 8-hour journey, she understood that look. The coach lurched to a stop. Rose peered through the window, but the glass had frosted over completely. She could hear the driver climbing down from his perch, his boots crunching in what must already be deep snow. Then his face appeared at the window, weathered and hard, his eyes holding no apology whatsoever. He didn't bother opening the door, just shouted through the glass. "End of the line, miss." Rose's stomach dropped. "We can't be in Thornfield yet. The advertisement said 8 hours from Helena. We're not in Thornfield." The driver's voice was flat matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the price of grain, rather than abandoning a woman in the wilderness. "We're about 3 miles out. Storm's getting worse. Horses can't make it through drifts this deep. You'll have to walk the rest." "Walk?" Rose pressed her hand against the cold glass. "In this, better than dying out here when the coach gets stuck and the horses freeze." He turned away, already dismissing her. "There's a ranch about a mile northeast. Big place, can't miss it if you follow the fence line. Tell Thorne I said you should have waited for better weather." Rose shoved the door open, nearly falling as wind hit her like a physical force. Snow stung her face, tiny particles of ice that felt like needles against her skin. "You can't just leave me here." But the driver was already back on his perch, gathering the reins. He looked down at her one last time, and something that might have been pity flickered across his face. Might have been. With men like this, it was hard to tell. "You got warm clothes?" Rose nodded, though her wool coat and traveling dress were designed for Boston winters, not Montana blizzards. "Then you'll probably make it. Follow the fence posts. Don't stop moving, not even for a minute. You stop, you freeze. Simple as that." He clicked his tongue at the horses. The coach lurched forward, wheels cutting through snow that was already past Rose's ankles. Within seconds, the dark shape of the stagecoach had vanished into the white void, swallowed by the storm as completely as if it had never existed. Rose stood alone on what might have been a road, or might have been open prairie. In the whiteout there was no way to tell. Her traveling bag sat at her feet where the driver had tossed it. She picked it up, feeling the pathetic weight of everything she owned in the world. 2 dresses, 1 nightgown, her mother's silver brush, her father's veterinary instruments wrapped in oiled cloth, and $9 in coins sewn into the lining. $9 between her and starvation, between her and the brothels where desperate women ended up when they had nowhere else to go. The wind screamed again, and Rose felt the cold begin to work its way through her coat. Her fingers were already numb inside her gloves. She couldn't feel her toes. 1 mile northeast. "Follow the fence posts." Rose turned, squinting against the wind, and began to walk. The world had narrowed to white and cold, and the desperate need to keep moving. Rose couldn't see more than a few feet ahead, couldn't see the fence posts the driver had mentioned, couldn't see anything except snow, and more snow, horizontal sheets of it driven by wind that felt strong enough to knock her down. She counted her steps to keep panic at bay. 1, 2, 3, 4. At 100, she allowed herself to stop for 3 seconds, just long enough to catch her breath and wipe the ice from her eyelashes. Then she started counting again. Her father had taught her this. During the war, when he'd served as a cavalry veterinarian, he'd told her stories about winter campaigns, about soldiers who'd frozen to death within sight of camp because they'd stopped moving, about horses that had died standing up, their blood turned to ice in their veins. "The cold is patient, Rosie girl," he'd said, his voice rough from the laudanum he'd needed for the pain in his leg. The wound that had slowly killed him over 10 years, infection, eating away at muscle and bone until there was nothing left but a ghost of the man he'd been. It doesn't care if you're brave or scared, it just waits. And the moment you stop fighting, it takes you. Rose kept walking. Her thoughts began to drift, which she knew was dangerous. This was how it started. This was how the cold got you. First, the shivering stopped, which seemed like relief, but was actually your body giving up. Then the confusion set in, the strange sleepiness that made you want to lie down in the snow and rest just for a moment. She'd seen it once back in Boston, a drunk who'd passed out in an alley during a winter storm. By the time anyone found him the next morning, he'd been frozen solid, a peaceful expression on his face like he was having a pleasant dream. Rose's foot caught on something buried beneath the snow. She stumbled, went down hard on her knees. The impact jarred her traveling bag loose from her numb fingers. It tumbled away, disappearing into a drift before she could grab it. Everything she owned. Gone. For a long moment, Rose knelt in the snow, breathing hard, watching white particles settle on her dark coat. It would be so easy to stay here, so easy to just close her eyes and let the cold do its work. She was tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of the gnawing hunger in her belly and the desperate calculations about how long $9 could last, and the crushing weight of knowing she was utterly, completely alone. Her father was dead, had been dead for 6 months now, though the actual dying had taken years. Her mother was long gone, claimed by cholera when Rose was 12. She had no siblings, no cousins, no one in the world who would notice or care if she simply vanished into this white hell. She'd answered the advertisement because there was nothing left, because the factory where she'd worked as a clerk had closed, taking her 30 cents a day, wage with it, because her landlady had given her 1 week's notice, and Rose had spent 5 of those days writing letters to every possible employer in Boston, receiving nothing but silence in return. The advertisement had been simple, almost brutal in its honesty. Rancher in Montana Territory seeks educated woman for marriage. Must be practical, hardworking, and willing to adapt to frontier life. No romantic notions. This is a business arrangement. Reply to Wyatt Thorne, Thornfield Station, Montana Territory. Rose had replied because she was practical, because she understood business arrangements, because romantic notions were luxuries for women who could afford them, and Rose Caldwell had exactly $9 and 7 days before she'd be sleeping in the streets. Wyatt Thorne had written back within 2 weeks. His handwriting was surprisingly elegant for a rancher, his words carefully chosen. Miss Caldwell, I received your letter and find your qualifications suitable. I own a horse ranch in Montana Territory, breeding quarter horses, primarily for military contracts. The work is demanding and the isolation considerable. I require a wife who can manage a household, potentially assist with business correspondence, and accept that this marriage will be one of partnership rather than romance. I am 32 years old, in good health and financially stable. If these terms are acceptable, I will send funds for your travel. The arrangement will be legally binding upon your arrival. Respectfully, Wyatt Thorne. Rose had read that letter 20 times, parsing every word for hidden dangers. But there had been nothing overtly threatening. No promises of love she knew would be false. No flowery language designed to obscure harsh realities. Just a straightforward offer from a man who needed a wife and a woman who needed survival. She'd written back accepting his terms. The travel funds had arrived 1 week later, $40 in crisp bills that represented more money than Rose had seen in months. She'd used $36.50 for the train ticket to Helena and the stagecoach fare to Thornfield. The remaining $3.50 sat in her traveling bag, which was now buried somewhere in this white nightmare. Actually, no. Rose looked down at her hands, at the dark shape barely visible beneath the accumulating snow. Not buried, right here. She must have fallen on it without realizing. She grabbed the bag's handle, hauled herself to her feet through sheer, stubborn will. Her legs shook. Her lungs burned with each breath of air so cold it felt like inhaling knives. But she was standing, and standing meant she could walk. Rose took a step forward, then another, started counting again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Somewhere around step 467 she saw it, a dark vertical line cutting through the white. A fence post exactly where the driver had promised it would be. Rose stumbled toward it, grabbed the rough wood with both hands like it was salvation itself. The post was solid, real proof that human beings lived in this frozen hell and had built things that endured. If there was one post, there would be another, and another, a line of them leading to shelter. She followed the fence line northeast, one hand trailing along the wire strung between posts, using it as a guide when the wind made seeing impossible. The wire cut through her glove, in places abrading her palm, but the pain was good. Pain meant she was still alive, still feeling. Time stopped having meaning. There was only the fence line and the snow and the mechanical process of lifting one foot, then the other. Rose's world had narrowed to this single task. Survive the next step, then the next, then the next. She almost walked past the gate. It was only because her hand hit a post that was thicker than the others, more substantial, that she stopped and looked. Squinted through the white and saw the shadow of crossbeams overhead. A gate, which meant a road, which meant somewhere worth going. Rose turned through the gate and followed what she hoped was a road. The fence line continued on her left, a guide through the chaos. Her breath came in ragged gasps now, each inhalation painful. She couldn't feel her feet at all anymore. Couldn't feel her hands even though she knew they must still be gripping her bag because the weight was still there. This was how she would die. Not quickly frozen in place like that drunk in Boston, but slowly step by step until her body simply gave out and she collapsed into a drift and the snow buried her. And come spring, someone would find her body and wonder who she'd been. A shape emerged from the white, solid and dark and blessedly rectangular. A building. Rose tried to run toward it, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. She managed a stumbling walk, then fell against what turned out to be a wall. Rough-hewn logs chinked with some kind of mortar, a barn, maybe, or a cabin. She didn't care which. It was shelter. She felt her way along the wall, searching for a door. Her hands were clumsy, useless things at the ends of her arms. She couldn't make her fingers work properly. But there, a handle. She grabbed it with both hands, put her full weight into pulling. The door didn't budge. Rose pulled harder, desperation giving her strength she shouldn't have had. Nothing. The door was either locked or frozen shut. She pounded on it with numb fists, knowing even as she did that it was futile. The wind was too loud. No one would hear her over the storm. Unless. Rose opened her mouth and screamed, "Help, somebody! Help me! I'm freezing!" The wind ripped the words away. She screamed again, pounding on the door until her fists left dark smears that might have been blood. She couldn't tell. Couldn't feel anything anymore. "Please, please, someone. I don't want to die out here." Her voice cracked on the last word. She slumped against the door, sliding down until she was kneeling in the snow. This was it then. She'd made it so close. Close enough to touch shelter, but not close enough to survive. The cold was winning. Rose could feel it now, that strange warmth people talked about. The final trick the body played before shutting down. She was so tired. So very tired. Maybe she should just close her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. "Miss Caldwell!" The voice came from somewhere above her. Rose tried to look up, but her neck wouldn't work properly. "Miss Caldwell, can you hear me?" A shape resolved itself from the white. Tall, broad-shouldered, covered in snow. A man? Rose tried to answer, but her jaw was locked tight, teeth chattering so hard she bit her tongue. Tasted blood. Christ! The man dropped to his knees beside her. "You're early, and nearly frozen." He pulled off one glove, pressed his bare hand against her cheek. His skin felt like fire. Rose tried to pull away, but couldn't move. "Can you stand?" Rose managed the smallest shake of her head. "All right, then." The man gathered her up as if she weighed nothing. Rose found herself pressed against a chest that was warm and solid and smelled like horses and leather and something sharp like pine. She wanted to tell him to put her down, that she could walk, that she wasn't some helpless thing that needed carrying. But her body had other ideas. Her head lolled against his shoulder and stayed there. "Been waiting 3 months for you, Miss Caldwell," the man said as he carried her through the storm. His voice was deep, rough-edged, not unkind. "Didn't expect you to show up in the worst blizzard we've had in 5 years." Rose tried to form words. Tried to explain about the stagecoach driver, about being abandoned on the road. but all that came out was a pathetic, whimpering sound that mortified her. "Save it," the man said. "Talk later. Right now we need to get you warm before you lose fingers or toes." He kicked open a door. Warmth hit Rose like a physical blow so intense after the bitter cold that it actually hurt. She gasped, and the man carried her straight to what must be a fireplace, because she could feel heat radiating against her face. He set her down in a chair close to the fire. Rose's eyes were frozen shut, crusted with ice. She felt the man's hands on her face brushing away snow and ice with surprising gentleness. "Going to take off your coat now," he said. "Need to get these wet clothes off you." Rose managed to nod. Modesty seemed like a foolish concern when weighed against survival. The man worked quickly, efficiently, removing her coat and the shawl underneath. Her dress was soaked through the heavy wool, having absorbed melted snow. He paused, and Rose forced her eyes open just enough to see him properly for the first time. He was perhaps 30, maybe older. Hard to tell with men who lived rough lives. His face was weathered, tanned, despite it being winter. Dark hair curled slightly where it touched his collar. Eyes that were gray, the color of winter sky before snow. A strong jaw shadowed with several days of beard. Not handsome exactly, but striking. The kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the same granite that formed the mountains. "I'm going to get you some dry clothes," he said. "Women's clothes. They'll fit well enough." He disappeared into another room. Rose sat shivering by the fire, gradually becoming aware of her surroundings. She was in a cabin larger than she'd expected. The main room was perhaps 20 feet across, with a high ceiling supported by rough-hewn beams. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, big enough to roast a whole pig. Furniture that was simple but well made. A table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair, built-in shelves filled with books. Rose focused on that detail, clinging to it. A man who owned books was a man who read. A man who read might have some education, some refinement. Might not be the brutal frontier savage she'd half expected. The man returned, carrying a bundle of clothing. He set it on the chair beside her. "Put these on, I'll turn my back." "Thank you," Rose managed. Her voice came out as a hoarse whisper. The man turned away, moved to the stove on the far side of the room. Rose heard him putting a kettle on. Making tea, maybe, or coffee. She fumbled with the buttons of her dress, her fingers still clumsy with cold. The wet fabric clung to her skin, making it difficult to remove. But eventually, she managed peeling the sodden layers away and replacing them with the dry clothes the man had provided. A simple cotton dress, worn soft with age, too large for her by several sizes, hanging loose on her thin frame. But dry and warm. Rose had never appreciated dry clothes quite so much in her entire life. "Done," she said. The man turned back. His eyes swept over her, assessing. Not lustful, Rose noted. Not the way some men looked at women, just evaluating the way a doctor might evaluate a patient. "How are your fingers? Your toes? Can you feel them?" Rose wiggled her toes experimentally. Pain shot through her feet, sharp enough to make her gasp. But pain was good. Pain meant the tissue was alive. "They hurt," she said. "Good, that means no frostbite. If you couldn't feel them at all, we'd have a problem." He brought over a steaming mug. "Tea, strong and sweet. Drink it slowly." Rose took the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her palms. The first sip burned her tongue, but she didn't care. It was hot and sweet and reaching all the way to her frozen core. "You're Wyatt Thorne," she said. Not a question. "I am. I'm Rosemary Caldwell, though I suppose you figured that out." "I did." Wyatt pulled up a chair and sat across from her, not too close, maintaining proper distance. "Your letter said you'd arrive next week?" "The clerk in Helena said there was space on today's stage. I thought it better to come early than to spend money on lodging while I waited." Rose took another sip of tea. "The driver said he told you I should have waited for better weather." "Old Pete?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across Wyatt's face. "That sounds like him. Did he at least tell you where to go before he abandoned you?" "He said to follow the fence line. That there was a ranch about a mile northeast. 3 miles, actually, but close enough in a blizzard." Wyatt stood, moved to the window. "Storm's getting worse. You're lucky you made it. Another hour out there and we'd be burying you, come spring." Rose set down her tea with hands that shook slightly. "I appreciate your bluntness, Mr. Thorne, But I was aware of the danger. Were you—" He turned from the window, those gray eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you made a foolish choice based on saving a few dollars. That's not practical. That's desperate." Heat that had nothing to do with the fire or the tea flooded Rose's cheeks. "And if I am desperate, does that change our arrangement?" "No." Wyatt's voice was flat. "I asked for a practical woman. Desperation can make a person practical faster than anything else, but I need to know what I'm dealing with. Your letters were vague about your circumstances." Rose lifted her chin. She'd known this moment would come, had rehearsed what she'd say, but somehow sitting here in borrowed clothes, still shaking from her near death in the snow, the practiced lies felt impossible to speak. "My father died 6 months ago," she said. "He was a Union cavalry veterinarian during the war, took a bullet in the leg at Chickamauga. The wound never properly healed. Infection set in, spread slowly over the years. He lived on laudanum and willpower until both ran out." Wyatt said nothing, just listened, waiting. "My mother died when I was 12, cholera. After she passed, it was just father and me. He taught me everything he knew about treating animals. Horses primarily, but also cattle dogs, anything people brought to him. I assisted with surgeries, deliveries, setting broken bones. By the time I was 16, I could handle most cases myself." "Go on." "After father died, I took a clerk position at a textile factory. The pay was poor, 30 cents a day, but it was regular. I had a room in a boarding house. It wasn't much, but it was mine." Rose's hands tightened on the mug. 3 months ago, the factory closed. No warning. Just showed up one morning to find the doors locked and a notice saying the owner had declared bankruptcy, and no one would hire you. I sent 47 letters to potential employers. Not one replied." Rose met Wyatt's eyes, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "I had 1 week before my landlady would put me out. I had $9 to my name, and I had no family, no friends with means to help. So when I saw your advertisement, I answered, because the alternative was the streets, or worse." Silence stretched between them. The fire crackled. Wind howled outside, rattling the windows. Wyatt studied her with those winter-gray eyes, and Rose couldn't tell what he was thinking. Finally, he nodded. "That's honest, at least. I appreciate that more than you might think." He moved to the stove, poured himself a cup of coffee, took a long drink before continuing. "I'll be equally honest with you, Miss Caldwell. I'm 32 years old. I own this ranch, free and clear, 200 horses, 6,000 acres of grazing land. I breed quarter horses primarily for cavalry contracts. Business is good, not wealthy, but comfortable." He paused, set down his cup. "I was married before. Her name was Anna. She died 3 years ago in childbirth. The baby, a son, was stillborn." Rose's breath caught. She'd expected a widow might be willing to take a mail-order bride. But this was raw grief, barely scabbed over. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "So am I." Wyatt's voice was carefully neutral. "Anna hated it here. Hated the isolation, the hard work, the lack of society. We fought about it constantly. She wanted me to sell the ranch, move back east. I refused. And then she died. And I wonder sometimes if I killed her through stubbornness." He looked at Rose directly. "I won't make promises I can't keep. I won't tell you I'll love you because I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. But I will treat you fairly. You'll have your own room, your own space. I won't force intimacy you don't want. This is a business arrangement, exactly as I said in my letter. Partnership, not romance." "I understand," Rose said quietly. "Do you?" Wyatt crossed his arms. "Because you need to know what you're agreeing to. This ranch is isolated. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles. Town is 12 miles. And in winter, we might not get there for weeks at a time. The work is constant. The weather is brutal. And I'm not an easy man to live with." Anna made that clear enough. "And yet you're offering me a choice," Rose said. "You could have simply married me the moment I arrived. The law would support you. But instead you're telling me the truth and giving me the option to refuse. That suggests you're more decent than you're admitting." Something flickered across Wyatt's face. Surprise, maybe. "The stagecoach won't run again until the storm passes. That could be days. You'll stay here until then. If after spending time here you decide this isn't what you want, I'll pay your passage back to Helena and give you enough money to make a fresh start somewhere else. $50. Enough to last until you find work." Rose stared at him. You'd do that? After paying for my travel here, I asked you to come all this way based on letters. That's not a fair basis for a lifelong commitment. You deserve the chance to see what you'd be committing to before you make the choice. Rose thought about the alternative. $50 would last her perhaps 3 months if she was careful. And then what? She'd be right back where she started, scrambling for work that didn't exist, counting pennies, sleeping in cheaper and cheaper rooms until there were no rooms left, only alleys and doorways, and the slow slide into the kind of desperate poverty that destroyed women completely. I don't need time to decide, she said. I came here knowing what I was agreeing to, a business arrangement, partnership without romance. I can live with those terms. Can you? Wyatt's eyes searched her face. Because I'm 40% certain you'll be running back to Helena the moment the snow melts. Then you'll lose your bet, Mr. Thorne. I'm not a woman who runs from hard work or harsh conditions, and I'm certainly not so foolish as to throw away security because it comes without love poems and flowers. The corners of Wyatt's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You're not what I expected, Miss Caldwell. I could say the same about you, Mr. Thorne. They regarded each other across the cabin. Outside the blizzard raged on, but inside the fire burned warm, and the tea was hot, and Rose Caldwell felt for the first time in months like she might actually survive. You should rest, Wyatt said finally. The room at the top of the stairs is yours. It was Anna's sewing room, but I had the hands clear it out last month and put in a proper bed. It's not fancy, but it's private. Thank you. Rose stood, her legs still unsteady. Wyatt reached out as if to help her, then stopped himself, maintaining that careful distance he'd established. One more thing, he said. Tomorrow, if the weather breaks enough, I'll need to check on the horses. Winter storms are hard on them, especially the pregnant mares. I could use an extra set of hands if you're willing. Rose paused at the base of the stairs. I'm willing, but you should know I'm more than just an extra set of hands. My father taught me veterinary medicine. If any of your horses are in trouble, I can help. Wyatt's eyebrows rose. Your father was a veterinarian for 20 years, and I worked beside him for 8 of those. I'm not licensed, obviously. Women aren't allowed to attend veterinary college, but I know anatomy, pharmacology, surgical technique. I've delivered foals, treated colic set, broken legs, sutured wounds. Whatever you need, I can do it. For a long moment, Wyatt just looked at her. Then slowly, deliberately, he smiled. It transformed his face completely, erasing the hard lines and making him look younger, lighter. Miss Caldwell, he said, I think this arrangement might work out better than either of us expected. Rose climbed the stairs to her new room, her body aching with exhaustion, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She'd nearly died tonight, had come within minutes of freezing to death in a Montana blizzard, and yet somehow she felt more alive than she had in months. The room Wyatt had given her was small, but clean. A narrow bed with a quilt that looked handmade, a dresser and washstand. A window that looked out over what she assumed was the ranch, though in the dark and snow she couldn't see anything. Rose sat on the bed and allowed herself finally to shake. Delayed reaction to her near death hitting all at once. She wrapped her arms around herself and breathed through it, forcing her mind to remain calm even as her body trembled. She'd made it. Against all odds, through a blizzard that should have killed her, she'd made it. And tomorrow, if the weather allowed, she would prove to Wyatt Thorne that he'd made the right choice in sending for her. She would show him what a woman trained in veterinary medicine could do. She would make herself indispensable. Because Rose Caldwell had learned one fundamental truth in her 24 years. The only person she could rely on was herself. And the only security worth having was security she earned through her own skills, her own determination, her own refusal to quit. She'd survived Boston. She'd survived her father's death. She'd survived the factory closing and the desperate poverty that followed. She'd survived a blizzard. And she would survive whatever came next, whether Wyatt Thorne chose to be her partner or not. Outside, the storm howled on into the night. But inside, in her small room at the top of the stairs, Rose Caldwell finally allowed herself to sleep. The morning came gray and quiet. Rose woke to silence so complete it took her a moment to remember where she was. No factory whistles, no sounds of other boarders moving through thin walls, just stillness and the soft crackle of a fire somewhere below. She dressed quickly in the clothes Wyatt had loaned her, wishing for her own things but grateful to have anything dry and whole. Her traveling bag sat by the door where someone must have brought it up while she slept. Rose opened it, relieved to find everything still there. Her father's instruments wrapped in oiled cloth, her mother's silver brush, the coins sewn into the lining. $9, her entire fortune. Rose tucked the bag under the bed and went downstairs. Wyatt was at the stove cooking something that smelled like bacon and coffee. He glanced up when he heard her footsteps. "Storm broke an hour ago," he said by way of greeting. "We've got maybe 6 hours before the next one hits. I need to check the stock, make sure none of the horses got injured or trapped." "I'll come with you." Wyatt studied her, assessing. "It's cold out there, and the snow is deep. I grew up in Boston, Mr. Thorne. I know cold." Rose moved to the table. "And if you've got pregnant mares, I should see them sooner rather than later. Establish a baseline so I'll know if something changes." "Eat first." Wyatt slid a plate across the table. Bacon, eggs, bread, toasted over the fire. More food than Rose had eaten in a single meal in weeks. She forced herself to eat slowly, not to wolf it down like the starving woman she was. Wyatt ate in silence across from her, and Rose appreciated that he didn't feel the need to fill every moment with conversation. Some people were comfortable with quiet. It was a rare quality. When they'd finished, Wyatt pulled out heavy coats, gloves, boots. "These were Anna's," he said, handing Rose the coat. "They should fit well enough." Rose took the coat, trying not to think about the dead woman who'd worn it, the woman Wyatt had loved and lost, the woman whose things still filled this house, whose presence still haunted these rooms. The coat fit perfectly. Outside, the world had transformed overnight. Snow lay in drifts as high as Rose's waist, in places sculpted by wind into strange, beautiful shapes. The sky was that particular shade of gray that promised more snow later, and the cold was breathtaking, sharp enough to make her lungs ache with the first breath. "Stay close," Wyatt said. "Paths are treacherous when you can't see what's under the snow." He led the way toward a large barn-breaking trail through snow that came past his knees. Rose followed in his footsteps, grateful for the path he made. Inside the barn, the temperature was only marginally warmer, but at least they were out of the wind, and the smell was familiar, comforting. Horses and hay and leather, the smell of her father's work. "I've got 20 mares," Wyatt said, moving down the center aisle. 12 of them are bred due to foal starting in March. The others are young stock, not ready yet. Rose walked slowly along the stalls, letting the horses get used to her presence. Some were curious, stretching their necks to sniff her. Others ignored her completely. A few pinned their ears back, warning her away. "That's Delilah," Wyatt said, pointing to a tall bay mare with a white blaze. "She's due in about 3 weeks. First foal for her, so I'm watching her close." Rose approached the stall carefully. Delilah was beautiful, with a refined head and intelligent eyes. Rose examined her briefly, running practiced hands along the mare's neck and barrel. "She looks healthy. Good confirmation. I'll check her more thoroughly closer to her due date." "Appreciated." They continued down the barn aisle. In the 4th stall, Rose found what she was looking for, a 3-year-old gelding favoring his left front leg. "This one," Rose said, entering the stall slowly. "How long has he been lame?" Wyatt frowned. "About a week. I've been resting him, but it's not improving." Rose ran her hands down the gelding's leg, feeling for heat and swelling. Found it in the hoof. She picked up the foot, examined the sole carefully. "Abscess. Deep one by the looks of it. Needs to be drained or it'll turn septic." "Can you do it?" "I can." Rose set down the hoof, met Wyatt's eyes. "But I'll need my instruments from my bag. And good light." 30 minutes later, Rose had the gelding cross-tied in the barn aisle, her father's surgical kit laid out on a clean towel. She worked with steady confidence, lancing the abscess, draining the infection, packing the wound with poultice. Wyatt watched in silence, but Rose could feel his assessment. This was her test. This was where she proved her skill was real, not exaggerated. When she finished, the gelding was already moving more comfortably, no longer favoring the leg. "He'll need the poultice changed twice daily for a week," Rose said, cleaning her instruments. "Keep the hoof dry. He should be sound in 10 days. Wyatt nodded slowly. "You know what you're doing." "I told you I did." "People say a lot of things." Fewer can back them up. He extended his hand. You can back it up. Thank you. Rose shook his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength. You're welcome. Hank and Billy remained in the barn, and Rose heard them talking in low, excited voices as she and Wyatt walked away. Did you see that? Drained that abscess clean as a whistle. Gelding's already moving better. Boss made a good choice with this one. Rose's lips curved in a small smile. She'd been here less than 24 hours. Had nearly died in a blizzard. Had agreed to marry a man she'd never met. And somehow, impossibly, she was beginning to think this might actually work. The week after the blizzard passed in a rhythm Rose hadn't expected. Work from dawn until long past dark, but work that mattered. Work that she understood. Wyatt was a man of few words, but the words he spoke carried weight. On her third morning at the ranch, he'd taken her through the entire operation. Showed her the breeding records going back 7 years, meticulous notes about bloodlines and characteristics, and which mares produced the strongest foals. Explained his contracts with the cavalry, how they paid premium prices for horses that could handle rough terrain and gunfire without panicking. Quality over quantity, he'd said, running his hand along a yearling's neck. I'd rather breed 20 exceptional horses than 100 mediocre ones. Rose had nodded understanding immediately. It was the same philosophy her father had held about his practice. Better to treat 10 animals properly than to rush through 30 cases and do half measures. By the end of that first week, she'd examined every horse on the property, found 2 more mares with complications. Nothing as severe as Delilah's breech presentation, but issues that needed monitoring. A gelding with the beginnings of navicular disease that would need special shoeing. A 3-year-old filly with a chronic cough that suggested heaves. She'd started treating them using the knowledge her father had drilled into her over 8 years of apprenticeship. The knowledge that had nowhere to go in Boston, where the veterinary schools wouldn't accept women and the established vets wouldn't hire a female assistant no matter how skilled she was. Here none of that mattered. Here the only question was whether she could do the work, and she could. The ranch hands had gone from skeptical to cautiously respectful. Hank, the older foreman with weathered hands and a taciturn manner, had stopped questioning her methods by day 4. Billy, younger and more talkative, had started following her around like a puppy asking questions about anatomy and treatment. How do you know where to cut when you're draining an abscess? He'd asked while watching her lance a hoof infection. Anatomy, Rose had answered, not looking up from her work. You need to understand the structure underneath, where the blood vessels run, where the tendons attach. Cut in the wrong place and you'll do more damage than the original injury. And you learned all this from your father every night for 8 years. He'd quiz me over dinner, make me recite bone structures and muscle groups until I could do it in my sleep. Billy had shaken his head, impressed. Wish someone had taught me that way. Most of what I know about horses came from trial and error. That's one way to learn, Rose had said, finishing the drainage and beginning to pack the wound with poultice. But it's hard on the horses. Wyatt had been standing in the barn door, listening. Rose had caught him watching her several times that week, his expression unreadable. Not hostile, but not exactly warm, either. Assessing, always assessing. That evening, he'd brought her Anna's medical books. 3 volumes on equine anatomy and disease, the pages worn soft from use. Anna wanted to learn, he'd said, setting the books on the kitchen table where Rose was eating supper. Thought if she understood the horses better, she'd enjoy ranch life more. But she never had the patience for it. Hated the blood and the mess. Rose had opened the first volume, seeing notes in the margins in a feminine hand. Questions, observations, sketches of bone structure that showed genuine effort to understand. She tried, Rose had said quietly. She did. Wyatt's voice had been carefully neutral. For about 3 months. Then she gave up and went back to complaining about the isolation. He'd left Rose alone with the books. She'd stayed up until midnight reading them, finding comfort in the familiar terminology, the detailed illustrations. And in the margins, she'd found Anna. A woman who'd tried to love this life because she loved the man who'd chosen it. A woman who'd failed not through lack of effort, but through fundamental incompatibility. The frontier required a certain kind of person, someone who could find satisfaction in hard work and simple pleasures, Someone who didn't need constant society and entertainment. Anna hadn't been that person. Rose, she was beginning to realize, might be. The second week brought a crisis that tested everything Rose had learned. It was Lily Chen who found her bursting into the barn where Rose was checking on Delilah's progress. The Chinese woman's normally composed face was tight with worry. "Miss Rose, you need to come quick. One of Tom Bradley's horses, something's very wrong." Rose grabbed her father's instrument bag and followed Lily at a run. Tom Bradley owned the neighboring ranch 5 miles east. Rose had met him briefly when he'd come by to discuss purchasing one of Wyatt's yearlings, a solid man in his 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands. His wagon was in the yard and he was pacing beside it, his face gray with stress. "Thank God," he said when he saw Rose. "My mare Betsy, she's been my best broodmare for 10 years. But something's wrong. She started colicking this morning and now she's down. Won't get up. I've tried everything I know." Rose didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Where is she?" "Back at my place. I came to get Wyatt, but if you're half as good as Billy says you are, maybe you can help." "I'll try." Rose turned to find Wyatt already saddling horses. He moved with efficient speed, and within 5 minutes they were mounted and following Tom across snow-covered fields. The ride took 20 minutes at a hard pace. Rose's thighs burned from gripping the horse, her face numb from cold wind. But she focused on what she might find. Colic had a dozen different causes, from simple gas buildup to twisted intestines that would require surgery. The mare being down was a bad sign. Horses that gave up and lay down during colic often didn't get up again. Tom's ranch was smaller than Wyatt's, the barn older, but it was clean and well-maintained, the kind of place a working rancher built with his own hands and maintained with pride. The mare was in a box stall, lying on her side, breathing hard. Her belly was distended flanks, slick with sweat despite the cold. Rose could see the pain in every line of her body. She dropped to her knees beside the mare, hands already moving to examine her. Elevated heart rate, pale gums, absent gut sounds, all signs of serious colic. "When did she last pass manure?" Rose asked, not looking up. "Yesterday morning. Nothing since. And she's been trying to roll constantly. I've been walking her to keep her from it, but she's too weak now." Rose pressed her ear against the mare's belly, listening. Silence. That was wrong. A healthy horse's gut was constantly active, producing sounds as food moved through the intestines. This silence meant everything had stopped. Impaction, most likely, severe enough to completely block the intestines. "I need warm water, mineral oil, a bucket and towels," Rose said, "and I need them now." Tom ran to get the supplies. Rose continued her examination, palpating the mare's abdomen, feeling for the mass of impacted material. There, in the left side, a hard lump about the size of her fist. Wyatt knelt beside her. "How bad?" "Bad. Complete impaction in the large colon. If I can't break it up and get things moving, she'll die, probably within hours. What do you need?" "Time. Luck. And for her to be strong enough to survive what I'm about to do." Tom returned with the supplies. Rose stripped off her coat, rolled up her sleeves. She'd done this procedure twice before with her father. Both times the horse had survived. But both times the impaction had been less severe. "Hold her head," Rose told Wyatt. "Keep her calm. This is going to hurt." She tubed the mare first, passing a long rubber tube through the nostril and down into the stomach. The mare fought weakly, but Wyatt's hands were steady, his voice low and soothing. Rose worked the tube carefully, feeling it pass through the esophagus. Once the tube was in place, she began pouring mineral oil through it. Gallon after gallon, coating the intestines, trying to lubricate the impacted mass enough to break it down. The mare groaned a sound that tore at Rose's heart. But she kept working. This was the only chance. Surgery would kill the mare within minutes in these conditions. No sterile environment, no anesthesia, no way to keep the intestines from becoming infected. After the oil, Rose withdrew the tube and began the hard part. Manual manipulation of the impaction through the abdominal wall. She pressed her hands deep into the mare's belly, feeling for the mass. Found it. Began kneading it, breaking it apart from the outside. It was like trying to massage a rock, hard, unyielding. But Rose kept at it, working in slow circles, applying steady pressure. 15 minutes passed. 20. Rose's arms burned with effort, sweat dripping down her face despite the cold. The mare's breathing changed, becoming more labored. Her heart rate spiked. "She's giving up," Tom said, his voice cracking. "She's dying." "Not yet, she's not." Rose pressed harder, finding a soft spot in the impaction, worked at it, feeling it start to give way under her hands. And then, miracle of miracles, she felt movement. The impaction shifted. Not much, but enough. Rose kept working, not daring to stop. More pressure, more circular motion. The mass continued to break apart slowly, grudgingly. The mare's gut sounds returned, faint at first, then stronger. The beautiful, rumbling sound of intestines beginning to work again. "I've got gut sounds," Rose said, not allowing herself to smile yet. "The oil is working through." 10 minutes later, the mare passed a small amount of manure, then more. Then a sudden massive evacuation that made Tom whoop with joy. The mare lifted her head, looking around as if surprised to find herself still alive. Her breathing eased. The pain lines around her eyes faded. Rose sat back on her heels, her arms trembling with exhaustion. She'd done it. Saved a horse that by all rights should have died. Tom Bradley was crying, not bothering to hide it. "You saved her. God above you saved my Betsy." "The oil saved her," Rose said, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. The oil had helped, but the manual manipulation had been crucial. And her own strength. "She's a fighter." "Thanks to you." Tom grabbed Rose's hand, pumping it with enthusiasm that made her wince. "Name your price. Whatever you want, it's yours." "I don't charge for helping neighbors," Rose said, pulling her hand back gently. "Then I owe you a debt." Tom's face was serious now. "A life debt. You ever need anything at all, you send word to Tom Bradley, and I'll come running." Rose nodded, understanding that in this harsh country, such debts mattered. They were the bonds that held communities together when everything else failed. The ride back to Wyatt's ranch was quiet. Rose was too exhausted for conversation, and Wyatt seemed content with silence. But when they reached the barn and dismounted, he stopped her with a hand on her arm. "That was remarkable," he said. "I've seen vets with 20 years' experience who wouldn't have attempted what you just did. My father taught me that sometimes you have to take risks, that playing it safe means watching animals die when they didn't have to." "Your father taught you well." Wyatt's gray eyes held hers. "I'm glad you're here, Rose. Gladder than I expected to be." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The intimacy of it made something warm unfurl in Rose's chest. "I'm glad too," she said quietly. Word of what Rose had done for Tom Bradley's mare spread through the neighboring ranches like wildfire. Within days she had ranchers showing up at Wyatt's door asking if she'd look at their horses. A gelding with chronic lameness, a mare who wouldn't settle to breed, a colt with a mysterious fever. Rose treated them all, charging modest fees that Wyatt insisted on despite her protests. "Your skill has value," he'd said firmly. "Don't give it away for free or people won't respect it." So Rose charged $2 for a simple examination, $5 for treatment, $10 for surgery or complicated cases. The money accumulated in a tin box. Wyatt gave her more cash than she'd seen in months. "This is yours," Wyatt had said when she tried to give him half. "Your skill, your earnings." But Rose had insisted on contributing to household expenses. They'd compromised. She'd keep 70% and 30% would go toward ranch costs. It felt fair. Felt like partnership. The third week brought a visitor Rose hadn't expected. She was in the barn treating a young stallion Splint when she heard an unfamiliar voice in the yard, male educated with the kind of smooth confidence that came from wealth and position. "Wyatt Thorne, it's been too long." Rose walked to the barn door and saw a man in his 40s, impeccably dressed despite the harsh weather. Expensive coat-polished boots, a face that would have been handsome if not for the calculating coldness in his eyes. Wyatt's entire body had gone tense. "Clayton Birch, what brings you to my property? Can't a neighbor pay a friendly visit?" "We're not friends, Clayton. State your business or leave." The man called Clayton laughed, but there was no humor in it. Still direct as ever. "Very well. I'll be blunt. I want to buy your ranch." Rose's hands tightened on the barn door. She should go back inside, give them privacy, but something about Clayton Birch made her skin crawl, and she found herself staying listening. "The ranch isn't for sale," Wyatt said flatly, Everything's for sale at the right price. I'm prepared to offer you $12,000. That's generous, Wyatt, more than generous considering your debt situation. Wyatt's jaw tightened. What debt situation? Your bank loan, $3,000 due in 6 weeks. Clayton's smile was predatory. Did you think I wouldn't find out? My brother-in-law is the bank president. He tells me everything. The loan will be paid on time. Will it? Clayton pulled out a cigar, lit it with deliberate slowness. Because from where I'm standing, you're cutting it close. And if you default, the bank will foreclose. At which point, I'll buy the property for a fraction of what I'm offering now. Then you'll be disappointed, because I'm not defaulting. And now Clayton took a long draw on his cigar. I need this land, Wyatt. The railroad is coming through next year, and your property sits right in the path of the most profitable route. The company is willing to pay top dollar for the right-of-way. With your ranch and mine combined, I stand to make over $50,000. Then I guess you'll have to find another route. There is no other route, not one that makes financial sense. Clayton's voice hardened. Be reasonable. Take my offer. $12,000 is more than enough to start over somewhere else. I don't want to start over somewhere else. This is my home. This was Anna's grave, you mean? Clayton's words were deliberately cruel. She's dead, Wyatt. Holding on to this place won't bring her back. Rose saw Wyatt's hands curl into fists, saw the muscle jump in his jaw, but his voice when he spoke was deadly calm. Get off my property. Now. Think about my offer. You have 6 weeks. Clayton dropped his cigar in the snow, ground it out with his heel. After that, the price drops considerably. He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Wyatt stood in the yard, rigid with fury, until Clayton was out of sight. Rose emerged from the barn. How much trouble are you in? Wyatt spun around, clearly not having realized she was there. For a moment she thought he'd tell her it was none of her business. They were married in name only, after all. He had no obligation to share his financial problems with her, but then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he gestured toward the house. Come inside, I'll explain. In the warmth of the kitchen, Wyatt laid it out. He'd taken the loan 18 months ago to expand his breeding program, bought 3 exceptional mares from a ranch in Colorado, invested in better facilities. The investment was paying off his horses, commanding premium prices. But the loan terms were aggressive, $3,000 due in full by March 15th. I've got $2,000 saved, Wyatt said, staring into his coffee cup. I was planning to sell some yearlings in February to make up the difference, but the market's been slow this year. Fewer cavalry contracts, more ranchers breeding their own stock. How much would the yearling sales bring? Maybe 800 if I'm lucky, which leaves me 200 short. Rose did the math in her head. My veterinary fees, I've made $140 in the past 2 weeks. At this rate, I'll have 200 by mid-March. Wyatt looked up sharply. That's your money, Rose. You earned it. And I'm choosing to invest it in our partnership. Rose met his eyes steadily. This ranch is my home now, too. If Clayton Birch takes it, I lose as much as you do. You could take your money and leave. Start your own practice somewhere. You've got the skill for it. I could, Rose agreed. But I don't want to. I want to stay here and build something that matters, with you. The last 2 words hung in the air between them. Wyatt's expression shifted, something warming in those gray eyes. You mean that? I do. Wyatt set down his coffee cup and crossed to where Rose sat. He extended his hand, formal, serious. Partners then, equal partners. Your veterinary practice and my breeding operation combined. Rose took his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, warm. Partners. They shook on it, and Rose felt the fundamental shift in their relationship. This was no longer a marriage of convenience, no longer a desperate arrangement between strangers. This was choice, mutual choice. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and worry. Rose saw patients every day, building a reputation that spread beyond the immediate area. Ranchers traveled from 20 miles away to have her examine their stock. She treated everything from simple colic to complex fractures, and her success rate was high enough that people started calling her Dr. Caldwell, despite her lack of formal credentials. The money accumulated. By early March, Rose had saved $215. Combined with Wyatt's yearling sales, which had brought in $750, they had just enough to pay the loan with $20 to spare. But Clayton Birch wasn't finished. It was Hank who brought the news riding in hard just after dawn on March 8th. His horse was lathered, his face grim. "Boss, you need to see this." Wyatt and Rose followed him to the eastern pasture where the yearlings grazed, or where they should have been grazing. Instead, the fence was torn down in 3 places and the pasture stood empty. "They're gone," Hank said. "All 20 of them. Tracks lead northeast toward Birch's property." Wyatt's face went white. "He stampeded them. That son of a bitch stampeded my yearlings." Rose felt ice settle in her stomach. The yearlings represented not just money, but the future of Wyatt's breeding program. Carefully selected stock, the best of last year's foal crop. "We need to track them," she said. "See where they went." But even as she spoke, she knew Clayton Birch had taken them, or killed them. And either way, Wyatt's ability to pay the loan had just vanished. They found the yearlings 3 hours later, scattered across a ravine 5 miles from the ranch. Some were injured, limping from falls on the rocky terrain. 4 were dead, their necks broken from tumbling down the steep slope. Rose and Wyatt worked through the day gathering the survivors, treating injuries. A fractured leg here, lacerations there, one filly with a deep gash in her shoulder that required 30 stitches to close. By nightfall they'd accounted for all 20 yearlings. 16 alive, 4 dead. But of the 16 survivors, only 8 were sound enough to sell. The others would need weeks or months of recovery, assuming they recovered at all. Wyatt sat on a boulder head in his hands while Rose finished bandaging the last injured yearling. His shoulders shook, and Rose realized he was crying. Silent, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken. She crossed to him, sat beside him. Didn't say anything, just put her hand on his back and let him grieve. "I can't pay the loan," he said finally, his voice hoarse. 8 yearlings won't bring enough. Birch wins. He's going to take everything." Rose looked out over the ravine at the injured horses at the ranch hands, working to move them to safety. Thought about Tom Bradley's debt, about the network of ranchers she'd helped over the past month. "Not everything," she said slowly, "and not yet." Wyatt raised his head, looking at her with red-rimmed eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean we call in favors. Every rancher I've helped owes us something. Maybe not money, but goods, services, things we can trade or sell." Rose's mind was racing now, fitting pieces together. "And I can take on more patients, work longer hours. We've got a week until the loan is due. That's enough time." "Rose, even if we liquidate everything, we'll still be short." Birch made sure of that. "Then we find another way." Rose stood, offering Wyatt her hand. "My father used to say that the only impossible problems are the ones you stop trying to solve. We haven't stopped trying yet." Wyatt took her hand, let her pull him to his feet. He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "Why are you doing this?" "You could walk away, take your money, and start over somewhere. Birch can't touch you." "Because this is my home," Rose said simply. "Because you trusted me when no one else would. Because partnership means fighting together when things get hard." She paused, then added quietly, "And because somewhere along the way, I started caring what happens to you." Wyatt's breath caught. His hand tightened on hers. "Rose, we'll talk about what that means later," Rose said, pulling back gently. "Right now, we have a ranch to save." The next week was the hardest Rose had ever worked. She saw patients from dawn until midnight, treating everything anyone brought her. Took payment in whatever form people could offer. Cash when they had it, but also goods. Barrels of grain, sides of beef, lumber, tools, things they could sell or trade. Tom Bradley showed up on day 3 with $900 in cash. "I told you I owed you a life debt," he said, pressing the money into Rose's hands. "Betsy's thrown 2 foals since you saved her, worth twice what I'm giving you. Consider this interest on the debt." Other ranchers came too, having heard what happened. Small amounts, mostly $5 here, 10 there. But it added up. Combined with what they got from selling the recovered yearlings and trading the goods for cash, they had $2,700 by March 14th. Still $300 short. Rose sat at the kitchen table that night, exhausted beyond measure, staring at the money they'd collected. So close. They'd come so impossibly close. "We could sell Delilah," Wyatt said quietly. He'd barely slept all week, and it showed in the hollows under his eyes. She's worth at least 500, maybe more with the foal she's carrying. No, Rose's voice was sharp. That's your breeding future. Sell her, and you might as well give Birch the whole ranch. Then what do you suggest? Rose thought of the tin box under her bed, the emergency fund she'd been building. Money that was supposed to be her escape route if things went wrong. If Wyatt turned out to be cruel. If ranch life became unbearable. Her safety net. $320, saved coin by coin over the past month. I have money, she said slowly. Personal savings, $320. Wyatt shook his head immediately. That's yours. Your security. My security is this ranch. Our ranch. Rose went to get the tin box, brought it back and set it on the table between them. I'm investing it, not giving it away. Investing it in our future. Rose, if the bank still forecloses, you'll lose everything. And if I don't try, we'll definitely lose. At least this way we have a chance. She pushed the box toward him. Besides, I trust you to pay me back, with interest. Wyatt stared at the box, then at Rose. You're remarkable, you know that. Absolutely remarkable. I'm practical, Rose corrected, and I'm choosing to invest in something I believe in. He reached across the table, took her hand. When this is over, when we've paid the loan and dealt with Birch, we need to talk, really talk, about what this partnership means, about what you mean to me. Rose's heart did something complicated in her chest. I'd like that. The next morning they rode into town together, walked into the bank with $3,000 in cash and goods. The bank president, a thin man with calculating eyes who looked remarkably like his brother-in-law, Clayton Birch, counted it twice. It's all here, he said, sounding disappointed. The loan is paid in full. And I want that in writing, Wyatt said, with the original note marked satisfied and returned to me. The president's mouth tightened, but he did as requested, handed over the satisfied note with obvious reluctance. Outside the bank, Wyatt pulled Rose into his arms, right there on the street in full view of anyone passing by, held her close and breathed into her hair. We did it, he said. God above, we actually did it. Rose held him back just as tightly. We did. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd started as strangers and become partners, who'd fought together against impossible odds and won. When they finally pulled apart, Rose saw something in Wyatt's eyes that made her breath catch, something warm and deep and promising. Tonight, he said quietly, after supper, we talk. Rose nodded, her heart beating faster. Tonight. But tonight would bring revelations neither of them expected. Tonight would change everything. Because Clayton Birch wasn't the kind of man who accepted defeat gracefully, and his revenge, when it came, would test their partnership in ways they couldn't imagine. The celebration lasted exactly 4 hours. Rose and Wyatt returned from town in high spirits, the satisfied loan note folded carefully in Wyatt's coat pocket. They'd stopped at the general store, bought supplies they'd been putting off, real coffee, not the chicory blend they'd been stretching, sugar, a bolt of fabric Wyatt insisted Rose needed for new dresses, small luxuries that felt enormous after weeks of scraping together every penny. Lily had prepared a special supper, roasted chicken with vegetables from the root cellar. The ranch hands joined them, crowding around the big table, passing dishes and telling stories. Billy recounted how Rose had saved Tom Bradley's mare, embellishing the details until it sounded like she'd performed a miracle. Hank, normally taciturn, raised his glass of cider in a toast. To the boss and his wife. May they never owe Clayton Birch a damned thing. Everyone drank to that. Rose felt Wyatt's hand find hers under the table. A brief squeeze there and gone, but enough to send warmth spreading through her chest. Tonight, he'd said. They would talk tonight. She was both eager and terrified to hear what he'd say. But at 8 o'clock, just as the hands were heading back to the bunkhouse and Lily was clearing dishes, hoofbeats thundered into the yard, fast, urgent, the kind of riding that meant trouble. Wyatt was on his feet instantly, hand going to the rifle mounted above the door. Rose followed him outside, her medical bag in hand, from pure instinct. Tom Bradley nearly fell off his horse, his face gray in the lamplight spilling from the house. Fire, he gasped. The yearling barn. Saw smoke from my place and rode over. Wyatt, it's bad. Real bad. Rose's blood turned to ice. The yearling barn housed the 8 recovered horses from the stampede, the ones they'd nursed back to health, the ones that represented what little financial cushion they had left. Wyatt was already running toward the barn, Rose close behind. She could see it now, orange light flickering through the cracks in the walls, smoke pouring from under the eaves, not fully engulfed yet, but getting there fast. The screaming started before they reached the door. High, terrified whinnies. Horses trapped inside, panicking, as smoke filled their lungs and fire licked at the walls. "Get buckets," Wyatt shouted over his shoulder. "Form a line from the well. We contain this before it spreads to the other buildings." Hank and Billy were already moving, rousing the other hands from the bunkhouse. Within minutes, a bucket brigade formed, water sloshing from hand to hand. But Wyatt wasn't joining the line. He was heading straight for the barn door. "Wyatt, no," Rose grabbed his arm. "The smoke will kill you before you get 3 steps inside. Those horses are trapped. I'm not letting them burn." He shook her off and yanked open the door. Black smoke billowed out, thick enough to choke on. Through it, Rose could hear the horses screaming, could hear the crackle of flames eating through dry wood. Wyatt wrapped his bandana around his nose and mouth and plunged inside. Rose stood frozen for exactly 3 seconds. Every instinct screamed at her to run after him, to pull him back. But she'd be just as blind in that smoke, just as likely to get herself killed. Then she saw it. A water trough near the barn, nearly full despite the cold. And beside it, horse blankets hanging on a rail. Rose ran to the trough, plunged 2 blankets into the icy water, soaking them through, wrapped one around her own shoulders and head, took the other in her hands. The wet wool would filter some of the smoke, buy her a few extra seconds. She went in low beneath the worst of the smoke, the way her father had taught her during a warehouse fire in Boston. Stay below the heat. Feel for obstacles. Count your steps so you can find your way back out. The barn was chaos. Flames ran up one wall, feeding on old hay dust and dry wood. The horses were loose in their stalls, some throwing themselves against the doors, others frozen with terror in the corners. Rose found Wyatt in the 3rd stall, struggling with a yearling colt who was rearing and striking out with his front hooves. The colt's eyes were white-rimmed with panic foam flying from his mouth. "Can't get him to move," Wyatt coughed out. Smoke was getting thicker by the second. Rose threw the wet blanket over the colt's head, plunging him into darkness. The old horseman's trick. A blind horse will follow where you lead. She grabbed the halter and pulled. The colt, unable to see the flames anymore, stumbled forward. Rose led him toward where she remembered the door being, counting steps. One hand stretched out to feel for the wall. 10 steps, 15. Her lungs burned. The wet blanket over her head was already starting to steam from the heat. 20 steps. Her hand hit the door frame. "Out!" she gasped to Wyatt, who was right behind her with another yearling. "Get out now!" They burst into the cold night air, the contrast so extreme Rose fell to her knees, coughing. Someone took the colt's lead rope from her hands. Lily pressed a wet cloth to her face. "How many?" Rose managed to ask between coughs. "You got 2 out, 6 still inside." Rose struggled to her feet. Wyatt was already heading back in another soaked blanket wrapped around him. Rose grabbed a fresh blanket from the bucket line, plunged it in water, followed him. 3 more trips. 3 more terrified yearlings dragged blindfolded through smoke and flame. By the 4th trip, the heat was so intense, Rose could feel her hair singeing despite the wet blanket. The ceiling beams were starting to crack, groaning under the stress. "One more!" Wyatt shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. In the back stall. They made it halfway down the barn aisle before a beam gave way with a crack like a rifle shot. It fell across the aisle, behind them, cutting off their exit, sending up a shower of sparks. Rose's heart hammered against her ribs. They were trapped. The fire was between them and the door now, and the walls were starting to buckle. "The back doors," Wyatt said, grabbing her arm. "Storage entrance, this way." They found the last yearling, a filly, backed into the farthest corner of her stall. She was bleeding from a gash on her shoulder, probably from throwing herself against the wall. Rose got the wet blanket over her head while Wyatt kicked open the back door. It was barred from the outside. Wyatt hit it with his shoulder once, twice. The wood creaked but held. Around them, the fire was closing in heat so intense it hurt to breathe even through the wet cloth. "Again," Rose said, adding her weight to his. "Together. 1, 2, 3. They hit the door simultaneously. The bar splintered. The door flew open. They stumbled out into the snow, dragging the terrified filly between them, just as the barn roof collapsed behind them with a roar that shook the ground. Rose fell forward, hands sinking into snow that felt like heaven after the hellish heat. Beside her, Wyatt was coughing so hard she thought he might vomit. But they were alive. And the filly was alive, trembling, but whole. 7 yearlings saved. One they learned later hadn't made it. Overcome by smoke before they could reach her. The bucket brigade had managed to keep the fire from spreading, but the yearling barn was a total loss. Nothing left but smoking timbers and ash. Rose sat in the snow watching it burn her lungs raw, her hands blistered from the heat. Wyatt collapsed beside her, equally spent. "Birch," he said hoarsely. "This was Birch." "You can't know that." "I know." Wyatt's voice was flat with certainty. The fire started on the west wall away from the house where no one would see it right away. Someone set this deliberately. Rose wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because he was right. This wasn't an accident, this was sabotage. Hank approached, his face grim. "Boss, I found something." He held out a silver pocket watch, the case partially melted from heat, but still recognizable. Engraved on the back were the initials C. B. Clayton Birch. Wyatt took the watch, turned it over in his hands. His expression was utterly cold, all emotion locked down tight. He dropped this while setting the fire, probably fell out of his pocket. "That's evidence," Rose said. "We can take it to the sheriff, have Birch arrested." "The sheriff is Birch's cousin." Wyatt's laugh was bitter. "You think he'll arrest family over a watch that could have been planted, over a fire that could have been an accident? Then what do we do?" Wyatt stood slowly, painfully. Every movement spoke of exhaustion and injury, but his eyes were hard as granite when he looked toward the east, toward Birch's property. "We make him regret this. We show him he can't break us." But even as he said it, Rose could see the desperation underneath. They'd saved 7 yearlings out of 8. But the barn was gone. The hay stored inside was gone. The tack and equipment were gone. The financial loss was catastrophic, and Birch knew it. The next morning brought worse news. Rose was treating the burned filly, cleaning the shoulder wound, and checking for smoke damage to her lungs when a rider came from town. Not someone Rose recognized. A clerk from the bank, young and nervous. "Message for Mr. Thorne," he said, handing over an envelope. Wyatt opened it there in the yard, read it once, then read it again. His face went completely blank. "What is it?" Rose asked. "The bank. They're calling in my operating loan, the one I used to buy feed and supplies through the winter." His voice was mechanical, detached. "They're giving me 2 weeks to pay it in full, $1,200. Rose felt the ground tilt under her feet. "They can't do that. You've never been late on a payment. There's a clause. If the collateral is damaged or destroyed, they have the right to demand immediate repayment." Wyatt looked at the smoking ruins of the barn. The yearlings were listed as collateral. With the barn gone and the horses scattered, they're claiming the collateral is compromised. "Birch's brother-in-law," Rose said slowly. "The bank president." "Exactly." Wyatt crushed the letter in his fist. "Birch burns my barn, then has his brother-in-law call the loan. It's coordinated, calculated. He's not just trying to hurt me. He's trying to destroy me completely." Rose's mind raced through options, through possibilities. They had maybe $300 left after paying the first loan, nowhere near $1,200. And even if they sold everything, the horses, the equipment, they couldn't raise that much in 2 weeks. Unless. "My practice," Rose said suddenly. "I can take on more patients, work around the clock if I have to. There are ranches I haven't reached yet farther out. If I can bring in $200 a week for 2 weeks combined with what we have, we could get close." "Rose, you'll kill yourself working at that pace. Better than losing everything." She met his eyes. "We fight, Wyatt. That's what we do. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with." Something shifted in Wyatt's expression. The desperation faded, replaced by something harder, fiercer. He cupped Rose's face in his hands, heedless of the ranch hands watching. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly, "but God help me, I'm grateful you're here." Then he kissed her. Not gentle, not tentative. A kiss that tasted of smoke and desperation, and something that might have been love if they'd had time to examine it. Rose kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Wyatt rested his forehead against hers. "We survived this," he said. "Together. And then I'm going to marry you again, properly this time, with vows that mean something." "We're already married," Rose pointed out. "Not the way I want to be. Not the way you deserve." He pulled back, looked at her seriously. "When this is over, I'm asking you to choose me, not because you need security, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to." Rose's throat tightened with emotion. "I already choose you, Wyatt Thorne, every single day." His smile was worth everything they'd been through. "Then we'd better make sure we survive to enjoy it." The next 2 weeks were the longest of Rose's life. She worked from before dawn until long past midnight, riding out to ranches, sometimes 20 miles away. Word had spread about her skill, and desperate ranchers were willing to pay premium prices for a vet who could save their stock. She treated a prize bull with an infected hoof, a dairy cow with milk fever, a team of draft horses with colic from bad feed, 3 separate foaling emergencies, one of which required surgery to save both mare and foal. The money came in steady but slow. $50 here, $70 there. By the end of the first week, she'd earned $430. Not enough. Not nearly enough. Wyatt was working just as hard trying to sell anything that wasn't essential. Old equipment, spare tack, the wagon they rarely used. He brought in $200 in sales. Combined with what they'd saved, they had just over $900, still $300 short with 1 week to go. Rose pushed harder, took on cases she normally would have referred to more experienced vets. A complicated fracture that required pinning bone back together. A gelding with a growth that needed surgical removal. Each case was a gamble. If she failed, word would spread, and the work would dry up. If she succeeded, her reputation would grow. She succeeded every single time. By the middle of the second week, exhaustion was taking its toll. Rose fell asleep over supper twice. Nearly passed out while suturing a wound. Her hands developed a tremor from fatigue. Wyatt tried to make her rest. Rose refused. "We're so close," she insisted, even as she swayed on her feet. "1 more day, maybe 2. We'll have enough." But on the 13th day, disaster struck. Rose was treating a mare with a difficult labor at a ranch 15 miles out. The foal was twisted, one leg bent back, making delivery impossible. Rose worked for hours trying to reposition the foal internally. Her arms ached. Her vision blurred from exhaustion. She got the leg straightened, got the foal into proper position. The mare pushed, and the foal slid free, alive and healthy. And then Rose's vision went black. She woke in an unfamiliar bed, sunlight streaming through a window. Her head pounded. Her arms felt like dead weight. A woman she didn't recognize sat beside the bed knitting. She looked up when Rose stirred. "Finally awake. You've been out for 18 hours. Rose tried to sit up, panic flooding through her. "What day is it?" "March 14th. Easy now, you collapsed from pure exhaustion. Doc Miller says you need at least 3 days rest or you're going to do permanent damage." "March 14th. The loan was due tomorrow. I need to get back. I need to work." "You're in no condition to work." The woman's voice was kind but firm. "You can barely sit up without swaying." Rose pushed herself upright anyway, ignoring the way the room spun. "Where are my things? My medical bag. Your husband came for you this morning, took your bag and your earnings, said to tell you to rest and he'd handle everything." Rose's heart sank. Wyatt had come for her, which meant he knew she'd collapsed, which meant he knew they were out of time. She dressed with shaking hands, thanked the woman for her care, and borrowed a horse for the ride back to the ranch. Every mile was agony. Her body screamed for rest. But Rose pushed through, driven by desperation and fear. She reached the ranch at sunset to find Wyatt in the barn with Delilah. The pregnant mare stood in the crossties brushed to a shine, and standing next to her was Clayton Birch. Rose slid off the horse, nearly fell. Wyatt was beside her in an instant, catching her. "You should be resting," he said, worry clear in his voice. "What's he doing here?" Rose kept her eyes on Birch, making an offer. Birch's smile was vulpine. "I hear you're short on the loan payment. I'm willing to help." "We don't need your help," Rose said. "Don't you?" Birch gestured to Delilah. "Beautiful mare. Excellent bloodlines. I'm prepared to offer $800 for her, right now, cash in hand. Rose felt Wyatt go rigid beside her. $800. Combined with what they had, it would be enough to pay the loan, but it would cost them Delilah, the foundation of Wyatt's breeding program. The mare Rose had saved from certain death by turning her breech foal, the mare who was days away from delivering what could be the finest horse Wyatt ever bred. No, Rose said. She's not for sale. Rose, Wyatt's voice was strained. It might be our only option. There has to be another way. There isn't. Wyatt looked at her and Rose saw defeat in his eyes. We're out of time and out of options. If we don't pay tomorrow, the bank forecloses. We lose everything anyway. So we give him exactly what he wants. We hand over the one thing that makes this ranch special. We do what we have to do to survive. Rose wanted to argue, wanted to find some brilliant solution, but her exhausted mind couldn't think of one. They were trapped and Birch knew it. I'll give you until morning to decide, Birch said, clearly enjoying their desperation. But the offer expires at dawn. After that, you're on your own. He left, still smiling. Rose and Wyatt stood in the barn not speaking. The silence stretched between them heavy with everything they'd lost and everything they stood to lose. I'm sorry, Wyatt said finally. I should have seen this coming, should have protected us better. This isn't your fault, isn't it? His laugh was bitter. I'm the one who took the loans. I'm the one who made an enemy of Birch. I'm the one who brought you into this mess. You didn't force me to come here. I chose this. You chose survival. You didn't choose to pour everything you had into a failing ranch run by a stubborn fool. Rose grabbed his face, made him look at her. I chose you, Wyatt Thorne. Not the ranch, not the security. You. And I'd make the same choice again, even knowing how hard it would be. Something broke in Wyatt's expression. He pulled Rose into his arms, held her so tight she could barely breathe. What do I do? His voice cracked. How do I choose between the ranch and my pride? You choose the future, Rose said quietly. We sell Delilah to Birch. We pay the loan, and then we rebuild. We start over with the horses we have left, and we make it work. Without Delilah's bloodline, it'll take years to rebuild the breeding program. Then it takes years. Rose pulled back to look at him. But we do it together, and we do it free of debt and free of Birch's threats. Wyatt searched her face. You're sure? I'm sure. They held each other in the fading light, two people who'd fought as hard as they could and still come up short. But they were still standing, still together. That had to count for something. The decision was made. In the morning they would sell Delilah to Clayton Birch and save the ranch at the cost of its future, or so they thought. Because that night Delilah went into labor. And nothing about it went according to plan. Rose woke to Hank pounding on the bedroom door at 2 a.m. Mrs. Thorne the mare, she's foaling. Rose was on her feet instantly, pulling on clothes with hands that still trembled from exhaustion. Wyatt was right behind her, both of them running for the barn. Delilah was down in the foaling stall, breathing hard. Her water had broken contractions visible as her belly tightened, but something was wrong. Rose could see it in the mare's eyes in the way she kept looking at her flank. How long has she been down? Rose asked, already moving to examine the mare. 20 minutes, maybe less. Hank's face was worried. She's early, not due for another week. Rose knelt beside Delilah, ran her hands over the mare's belly, felt for the foal's position, and her blood went cold. The foal turned back, she said quietly. It's breech again. That's impossible, Wyatt said. You turned it weeks ago. I watched you. Foals can turn multiple times before birth. It's rare, but it happens. Rose's mind was racing. And if we don't turn it again right now, we lose them both. She looked at Wyatt, saw her own fear reflected in his eyes. They couldn't lose Delilah. Not tonight. Not when they'd already decided to sell her to save everything else. The universe seemed to have a cruel sense of humor. What do you need? Wyatt asked. Same as before. Water towels, my instruments. And luck. A lot of luck. Hank ran for supplies. Rose stripped off her coat, rolled up her sleeves. Her arms still ached from the work of the past 2 weeks, but she pushed the pain aside. This was too important to fail. Delilah groaned as another contraction hit. Time was running out. If the mare started pushing with the foal in breech position, it could rupture her uterus, kill them both within minutes. Rose reached inside, feeling for the foal. Found the hocks where the head should be, just like before. But this time, the foal was larger, taking up more space, less room to maneuver. "This is going to be harder than last time," Rose said. "The foal's bigger, less space to work. Can you do it?" Rose met Wyatt's eyes, saw absolute faith there. He believed she could do this, believed in her skill even when she wasn't sure she believed in herself. "I can try." She began the same process as before, pushing the hocks up and back, trying to create space to bring the head around, but the foal fought her, strong and stubborn. 10 minutes passed. 15. Rose's arms burned. Sweat dripped down her face despite the cold. "It's not working," she gasped. "The foal's too strong. Every time I get it positioned, it moves back." Another contraction hit Delilah. The mare screamed a sound Rose had never heard a horse make, a sound of pure agony. "We're losing her," Hank said quietly. Rose pulled her arm out, thinking frantically. There had to be another way. Some technique. She'd seen her father use some method she'd read about in Anna's medical books. And then she remembered. "Traction," she said. "We need ropes, soft ones. We loop them around the foal's hocks and pull while I guide from inside. Use the mare's contractions to help rotate the foal." "That's incredibly dangerous," Wyatt said. "You could tear the uterus." "We're out of safe options. This is our only chance." Wyatt didn't hesitate. "Tell me what to do." Rose talked him through it. Soft cotton ropes looped carefully around the foal's back legs. Wyatt positioned at the rear, ready to pull. Rose with one hand inside the mare, guiding, feeling for the exact moment when a contraction would give them the leverage they needed. "Wait for it," Rose said. Wait. Now pull." Wyatt pulled steadily while Rose guided from inside. The foal rotated slightly. Not much, but something. Another contraction. Another pull. The foal moved more this time. They worked in sync, Rose calling the timing, Wyatt providing the force. Pull, rest, pull, rest. Inch by painful inch, the foal began to turn. 20 minutes of coordinated effort. Rose's entire arm was numb. Wyatt's face was gray with strain. And then suddenly, the foal rotated fully. Rose felt the head come around, felt the front legs extend. "We did it," she breathed. "The foal's in position." Delilah pushed. Once, twice. The foal's head appeared, then shoulders. One more push, and the foal slid free in a rush of fluid. It lay motionless in the straw. Rose grabbed towels, began rubbing the foal vigorously, stimulating circulation. Come on, breathe." Nothing. She cleared the foal's nostrils, made sure the airway was open, rubbed harder. "Breathe, damn you, breathe." The foal's chest hitched. Once, twice. Then a full breath. Its eyes opened. It lifted its head. Rose sat back, tears streaming down her face. "It's alive. The foal's alive." Wyatt dropped to his knees beside her, his own face wet. "And Delilah," Rose checked the mare. Exhausted but stable. No sign of rupture or excessive bleeding. She would recover. She's going to be fine. They sat together in the straw, watching the foal struggle to its feet on wobbly legs. A colt Rose saw, strong and perfectly formed. The culmination of everything Wyatt had been breeding toward, and in the morning they would have to sell both mare and foal to Clayton Birch. The injustice of it threatened to break Rose's heart. But then Delilah nickered softly, calling to her baby. And the colt answered, stumbling toward his mother on uncertain legs. Found her udder and began to nurse. Life continuing despite everything. Hope refusing to die. Rose leaned against Wyatt, bone tired, but also strangely at peace. "We'll find another way," she said quietly. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Wyatt replied, but his arm tightened around her. "But thank you for refusing to give up." They sat in the foaling stall until dawn, watching mare and foal bond, watching the miracle they'd fought so hard to preserve. And when the sun rose, bringing with it the deadline they couldn't meet, Rose made a decision that would change everything. She stood, brushed straw from her clothes. "I'm going to town," she said. "Rose, the bank won't give us more time." "I'm not going to the bank." Rose's voice was steady, determined. "I'm going to see every rancher I've helped in the past 2 months, and I'm calling in every favor, every debt, every ounce of goodwill I've earned. In 3 hours, that's impossible." "Then I'll make the impossible happen." Rose grabbed her coat. "Because I refuse to hand Delilah over to Birch. I refuse to let him win." She paused at the barn door, looked back at Wyatt. "Do you trust me?" "With everything I have," Wyatt said without hesitation. "Then trust me now. And don't sell that mare until I get back." Rose rode into town as the sun cleared the horizon, pushing the borrowed horse harder than was wise. But she was out of time and out of options. The first stop was Tom Bradley's ranch. He answered the door in his nightshirt, alarmed at the early hour. Rose didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I saved Betsy's life. You said you owed me a debt. I'm calling it in. Now. Today. I need whatever cash you can spare." Tom's eyes widened, but he didn't hesitate. "How much?" "As much as you can give without hurting your family." He disappeared inside, returned 5 minutes later with $120. "It's everything I've got saved," he said, pressing the bills into Rose's hand. "And it's not nearly enough to repay what you did for us." "It's more than enough," Rose said, her throat tight. "Thank you." Second stop was the widow Martinez, whose prize bull Rose had saved from a near-fatal infection. $75. Third was the Jackson family, whose daughter's pony Rose had treated for colic. $50. Rose rode from ranch to ranch, calling in debts, asking for help. Some gave cash. Others wrote promissory notes she could trade. One rancher offered to buy 3 of Wyatt's recovered yearlings at premium price cash on delivery. By noon, Rose had visited 14 ranches. Her saddlebag was heavy with cash and notes. She rode back to town, went straight to the bank, walked in 5 minutes before the deadline, and dumped $1,200 in mixed bills and gold coins on the bank president's desk. "The operating loan," she said, "paid in full." The president counted it twice, clearly hoping to find it short, but the numbers added up exactly. "This satisfies the debt," he said sourly. "In writing," Rose demanded. "Now." She walked out of that bank with the satisfied note in her pocket and her head held high, rode back to the ranch in a daze of exhaustion and triumph. Found Wyatt in the yard, Clayton Birch beside him. Both men turned as she dismounted. "Well," Birch asked, smiling, "did you bring my $800 for the mare?" Rose pulled the banknote from her pocket, handed it to Wyatt. "The loan is paid, every penny. We don't owe the bank anything." Wyatt stared at the note, then at Rose. "How? I called in every favor. Asked every person I'd help to help me in return. And they did." Rose turned to Birch, letting him see the triumph in her eyes. "We don't need your money. We don't need anything from you. This ranch is ours, free and clear." Birch's smile vanished. "This isn't over." "Yes," Rose said quietly, "it is. Because I'm also filing a complaint with the territorial marshal about the fire and providing evidence." She pulled the melted pocket watch from her other pocket. "Your watch, found at the scene, with witnesses who'll testify to seeing you near the barn that night." It was a bluff. The witnesses were fabricated. But Birch didn't know that. His face went white, then red. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not. But I can make enough noise that the railroad investors hear about it, about how you burned down a competitor's property to force a sale. I imagine they'd be interested to know the kind of man they're dealing with." Birch stared at her, realizing he'd been outmaneuvered by a woman he'd dismissed as insignificant, by someone he'd underestimated completely. "You'll regret this," he said, but the threat was hollow. "I doubt it," Rose replied. Birch left without another word, his horse kicking up snow as he rode away. Rose watched him disappear over the ridge, then turned to Wyatt. "He'll try something else. Men like that don't give up. Let him try." Wyatt's voice was steel. "I'm filing a formal complaint with the territorial marshal tomorrow. Arson, attempted extortion, with Tom Bradley and a dozen others willing to testify to what he's done. Will it stick? Maybe not in a court where his family has influence, but it'll stick in the court of public opinion." Wyatt smiled grimly. "And that railroad company won't want to do business with a man under investigation for arson. Too much bad publicity." He was right. Within 2 months, word came that the territorial marshal had filed charges. The evidence was circumstantial, the pocket watch not quite enough for a conviction. But the railroad investors, reading about the scandal in eastern newspapers, quietly withdrew their offer. Without the railroad money, Birch couldn't service his own debts. His ranch went into foreclosure by summer. Last anyone heard, he'd left Montana Territory, entirely headed for California, with what little he could salvage. Some said it was justice. Rose thought it was simply consequences. You build your empire on intimidation and sabotage, eventually the foundation crumbles. Birch left without another word. Wyatt watched him go, then turned to Rose with an expression of absolute wonder. "You saved us," he said. "You saved everything." "We saved everything," Rose corrected. "Together." Wyatt pulled her into his arms right there in the yard, kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he said the words she'd been waiting to hear. "I love you, Rose Caldwell Thorne. Not because you saved my ranch or my horses, but because you're the bravest, most stubborn, most magnificent woman I've ever known. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you." Rose smiled, tears streaming down her face. "You already proved that the day you offered me a choice instead of a cage, the day you treated me as a partner instead of property. I love you too, Wyatt, more than I ever thought possible." "Then marry me," he said. "Again, for real this time, with vows we both mean and a future we choose together." "Yes," Rose said. "Yes to all of it." They held each other as the sun climbed higher, two people who'd started as desperate strangers and become something infinitely stronger. Partners, equals, and finally, truly in love. But before the wedding, there was one more ghost to lay to rest. Rose found Wyatt in the barn 3 days before the ceremony, sitting on a hay bale holding a small wooden box. "Anna's letters," he said, when Rose sat beside him. "Every letter she wrote me before we married. I've been keeping them in our bedroom, in the dresser drawer where you put your things." Rose had known they were there, had seen them once when putting away laundry and carefully not looked. "What are you going to do with them?" "Bury them with her." Wyatt's voice was steady. "Not because I want to forget her, but because she deserves to rest. And you deserve a home without her shadow in every corner." He stood, offered Rose his hand. "Will you come with me?" They rode to the small cemetery on the hill where Anna was buried. Wyatt dug a small hole beside the headstone, placed the box inside, covered it with earth. "I loved you," he said quietly to the grave, "but I couldn't make you happy. I'm sorry for that. I hope wherever you are you found the peace you couldn't find here." He stepped back, took Rose's hand. "And I love you," he said to Rose. "Not despite Anna, but including her. She was part of my life. She helped make me who I am, but you're my future. You're my choice." Rose squeezed his hand, tears on her cheeks. "Thank you for letting her go, for both of us." They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, and that night, for the first time, Rose removed Anna's photograph from the mantel and replaced it with a new one. A photograph of Wyatt and Rose taken in town the day they paid off the first loan. Partners, present tense, looking forward, not back. The wedding happened 3 weeks later, after Delilah and her colt were both strong and healthy, after the ranch had been rebuilt, after life had settled into something resembling normal. The entire community turned out, every rancher Rose had helped, every neighbor Wyatt had traded with. They packed the small church in town, spilling out onto the steps. Rose wore a dress made from the fabric Wyatt had bought in their moment of celebration before Birch's final attack. Simple white cotton, but beautiful in its clean lines. Wyatt wore his best suit hair, freshly cut, face shaved smooth. He looked nervous, hands fidgeting with his hat, until Hank took it from him with a quiet chuckle. The ceremony was brief but meaningful. No empty words, just honest vows spoken before people who mattered. "I, Wyatt Thorne, take you, Rose Caldwell, as my wife. I promise to respect your skill and value your partnership. I promise to stand beside you in hardship and celebrate your triumphs. I promise to love you not just with words but with actions every day of my life. I, Rose Caldwell, take you, Wyatt Thorne, as my husband. I promise to bring my whole self to this partnership, holding nothing back. I promise to fight beside you when times are hard and build with you when times are good. I promise to love you with all the fierce determination I possess for all the days we're given." The kiss was tender, reverent, a promise sealed. The celebration afterward lasted until dark, dancing, food stories told and retold. Tom Bradley got drunk and made a toast about the time Rose had saved his mare, embellishing details until it sounded like she'd performed surgery in the middle of a tornado. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Wyatt pulled Rose aside. "I have something for you," he said. "A wedding present." He led her to the barn where Delilah and her colt stood. The colt had grown in 3 weeks, legs longer, body filling out. He was going to be magnificent. "His name is Hope," Wyatt said, "because that's what you gave me when I had none left, and he's yours, your horse, to train, to sell, to keep, however you choose to use him." Rose ran her hand along the colt's neck, felt him lean into her touch. "He's perfect." "Not yet," Wyatt said, "but he will be. With your skill and patience, he'll be the best horse this ranch has ever produced." They stood together in the barn, watching the colt explore his stall. Outside, the last guests were departing, calling goodbyes and congratulations. "We did it," Rose said quietly. "We actually made it through." "We did." Wyatt's arm came around her waist. "Together." "Together," Rose agreed. And in that moment, standing in the barn with her husband beside her, and their future literally taking its first steps, Rose Caldwell Thorne knew she'd made the right choice. Not the safe choice, not the easy one, but the right one. She'd come to Montana Territory as a desperate woman with $9 and no options. She'd survived a blizzard, fought off a saboteur, built a veterinary practice from nothing. She'd saved lives, human and animal. She'd found partnership, respect, and love in equal measure. Most importantly, she'd found herself, the woman her father had always known she could be, strong, capable, unwilling to quit even when the odds were impossible. The future stretched ahead, full of challenges and triumphs yet to come. There would be more foals to deliver, more emergencies to handle, more long Montana winters to survive. But they would face it all together, partners in every sense that mattered. And that Rose thought, as Wyatt pulled her close and kissed her temple, was worth more than all the security in the world. The wedding was not the end of their story. It was barely the beginning. 1 year later, Rose stood in the doorway of their expanded cabin, watching Wyatt teach young Hope to accept a saddle. The colt, now a yearling, was everything they'd hoped for, strong, intelligent, with his mother's elegance and his sire's endurance. Rose's hand rested unconsciously on her swollen belly. 6 months along due in early spring. A daughter, the midwife predicted, though Rose didn't care as long as the baby was healthy. Her veterinary practice had grown beyond anything she'd imagined. 3 ranchers had offered to pay her a retainer just to have guaranteed access to her services. She'd declined, preferring to remain independent, but the steady stream of patients meant they'd finally built a proper clinic attached to the barn. "Mrs. Thorne?" Billy appeared beside her, hat in hand. At 20 now, he'd become Wyatt's right-hand man. "That mare from the Peterson Ranch just arrived. The one with the cough. I'll be right there." Rose grabbed her medical bag, feeling the familiar thrill of purposeful work. This was the life she'd built. Not the one she'd expected, but the one she'd chosen. 10 years later, the ranch had transformed. Where once there'd been a single barn, now there were 3. The breeding program had become legendary Wyatt's horses, commanding premium prices from cavalry officers across 3 territories. Rose trained Montana's first female veterinary apprentice, a determined young woman named Sarah Mitchell, who'd watched Rose work and decided that was the future she wanted. The territorial legislature had tried to prevent it, claiming women couldn't practice veterinary medicine. Rose had appeared before them with testimonials from 50 ranchers, detailed case records of her successful treatments, and a quiet threat to publicize their backwards thinking to Eastern newspapers. They'd backed down. Their children, Anna, age 8, and Thomas, age 5, ran through the house with the casual confidence of kids who'd never known anything but security and love. Anna had her mother's steady hands and already helped with simple treatments. Thomas had his father's quiet way with horses. Wyatt, now 42, had silver threading through his dark hair, but he still worked alongside his hands, still treated Rose as an equal partner in every decision. "We should expand east," Rose said one evening, studying the ranch maps. "Buy the Wilson property before someone else does. That's 3,000 acres, expensive. We can afford it, and Thomas will need land of his own someday." Wyatt smiled. "Look at you, planning dynasties." "I'm planning our family's future." Rose set down the map. "Is that so wrong?" "Not wrong, just different from the desperate woman who arrived in a blizzard 10 years ago. That woman is still here, She just has more resources now. They bought the Wilson property, expanded their operation, built an empire, one careful decision at a time. 30 years later, Rose stood on the porch of the ranch house, now enlarged twice over, watching her grandchildren play in the yard. Anna's 3 kids from Helena visiting for the summer, Thomas's 2 who lived in the foreman's house and helped run the ranch. At 54, Rose's hair was more gray than brown. Her hands showed the wear of 3 decades of hard work. But she still treated patients 3 days a week, still taught apprentices, still refused to slow down, despite Wyatt's gentle insistence that she'd earned rest. "You'll work yourself into an early grave," he'd said that morning, watching her pack her medical bag for a call 20 miles out. "Better than sitting idle." Rose had kissed his cheek. "Besides, I promised Mrs. Chen I'd check on her mare. I don't break promises." Wyatt, at 62, had finally started delegating more to Thomas. His body couldn't handle the physical labor the way it once had. But his mind was as sharp as ever. Breeding decisions still his domain. They'd become elders of the community, the couple everyone pointed to as proof that mail-order marriages could work, that partnerships built on respect could grow into love deeper than romance. Grandma, Anna's youngest, a girl of 5, ran up with a kitten. "It's hurt. Can you fix it?" Rose examined the kitten's twisted paw, already mentally cataloging what she'd need. "I can try. Let's get it to the clinic." 3 generations of healing. 3 generations of women who refused to accept limitations. Wyatt died in his sleep at 78 on a spring morning when the meadowlarks were singing and the colts were playing in the pasture. Rose woke beside him, knew immediately that he was gone. His face was peaceful, relaxed. A man who'd lived fully and left satisfied. She sat with him for an hour, holding his cooling hand, remembering. The blizzard that brought her here, the first time he'd smiled. The day he'd offered her partnership instead of subservience. The thousands of small moments that added up to a life shared. "You kept your promises," she whispered. "Every single one. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for waiting until I could choose you back." The funeral brought people from across Montana Territory. Ranchers, politicians, cavalry officers who'd bought Wyatt's horses. They told stories of his fairness, his skill, his quiet integrity. Rose stood beside the grave and didn't cry. Tears felt insufficient for what she was feeling. Instead, she spoke. "Wyatt Thorne was my husband for 34 years, but before that he was my partner. He saw my skill and valued it. He saw my strength and respected it. He saw me as a complete person, not a problem to be solved or a possession to be owned. And in doing that, he gave me the space to become more than I ever thought possible." She paused, looking out over the assembled crowd. The best marriages aren't built on passion. They're built on this. On seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway, on working side by side through crisis and triumph, on respect that deepens into love so profound it changes who you are. She placed a single iron rose on his casket, the one he'd forged for their second wedding, the symbol of everything they'd built together. Rose lived 8 more years. She worked almost until the end, training apprentices, treating patients, refusing to fade quietly. Her last case was a breech foaling 40 miles from home. She turned the foal successfully, ensured both mare and baby were healthy, and rode home in a rainstorm. She caught pneumonia 3 days later. On her deathbed, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Rose Caldwell Thorne spoke her final words to her daughter. "I came here with $9 and terror in my heart. I'm leaving with a legacy that will outlast me. Tell your children. Tell your grandchildren. Women are not fragile. We are not secondary. We are capable of anything if we refuse to accept limits." She died at 70, her father's veterinary instruments on the bedside table polished and ready, just in case. They buried her beside Wyatt on the ridge overlooking the ranch. The stone read, "Simple truth, Rose Caldwell Thorne, 1860 to 1930, veterinarian, partner, pioneer. She proved what was possible." Legacy, present day. The Thorne Ranch still operates, run by Wyatt and Rose's great-great-granddaughter, a veterinarian named Rose Mitchell Thorne. The original homestead is preserved as a historical site. In the small museum, visitors can see Rose's instruments. Wyatt's breeding records, the original advertisement, and Rose's reply. The Iron Rose now behind glass. But the real legacy isn't in artifacts, it's in the women who followed Rose's path. Montana's Veterinary College, founded 30 years after her death, has a scholarship in her name. Dozens of women have studied there, inspired by the story of the mail-order bride who became a frontier legend. And in the ranch office, mounted above the desk where daily business is conducted, hangs a quote from Rose's diary, discovered after her death. "I came here to survive. I stayed because I found something worth building. And I thrived because one man saw me as an equal and gave me room to prove it. That's not romance. That's revolution." The story of Rose and Wyatt Thorne isn't a fairy tale. It's better than that. It's proof that the best partnerships are built not on rescue, but on respect. Not on dependence, but on mutual strength. Not on passion alone, but on the daily choice to value each other's humanity. They met as strangers, bound by desperation. They worked as partners, building something meaningful. They loved as equals, who'd earned each other's trust. And they left a legacy that reminds us all what's possible when we refuse to accept the limitations others place on us.